So, what happened?
Well, if you haven't seen my previous video about Alan Wake, the first game, which is on the Xbox 360 and the PC, just stop the tape right now and watch that video instead, because I'm going to be expecting that anybody that sees this video to just know most of what was going on in the first Alan Wake game, because I'm just going to use that as a leaderboard, as a leaping point from that. Well, this game started off, as you know, with the creation of Mr. Scratch.
Don't mind him. He's Mr. Scratch. Your friends will meet him when you're gone. Use the clicker.
Now, Mr. is the dark half. Is kind of depicted as like the dark half. It's the double, the other, the mirror image. You see this kind of stuff in all kinds of famous literature. I believe Kafka wrote about it a lot. Talking about you see the double in his mirror and everything else. Heck, if you've seen the shows Heroes, Ali Lauder's character really had to deal with that kind of problem. So it's a prevailing theme in a lot of famous literature, books, television, movies. They always use the concept of the double. Now the cool thing about Mr. Scratch's creation was that the game literally does explain where he came from.
I've seen the enemy, and it's me. I've faced dark horrors before, things that live in the unimaginable pressures of the world beyond our own. Sometimes they masquerade as humans. That's what ultimately lurks inside Mr. Scratch. He's every mean-spirited tabloid story about me, an evil caricature, a creature formed in that vague territory of misconceptions, half-truths, and the dark imagination of people who heard a story about me. An urban legend made flesh, a serial killer, my dark half, brought to life by the power of Cauldron Lake.
Mr. Scratch is more than just a dark half, or the evil side of Alan. Mr. Scratch is a fictional entity made whole by the dark presence. He is every crazy story that's ever been told about Alan. He's fueled by the tabloid stories about him, about him being punched out and him punching out reporters and stuff like that, or the press, the television press. Any type of gossip that was ever traded about him. Every type of mean-spirited story or nasty rumor. Every story that was told that was negative about Alan Wake, regardless of how fictional it was made whole by the dark presence. And when Alan entered the dark place, at the end of the first game, it created Mr. Scratch.
The man before you is a champion of light. He is part of a conflict between darkness and light that is both ancient and eternal. He is chasing a dangerous quarry, the Herald of Darkness. His evil doppelganger, known only as Mr. Scratch.
I'll catch you eventually! Maybe. But what are you gonna do then? By then, I'll have had my hands on everything you love.
Now, the thing about Mr. Scratch to also remember is that Mr. Scratch got a lot of Alan's he was very much like the Jekyll and Hyde to Alan, in the case that he had Alan's memories. He had some of Alan's feelings. He had Alan's wedding ring. When it duplicated him, he had Alan Wake's wedding ring. This is my left hand, right? Yeah. So all of that stuff made him, at least in immediate appearance, the appearance of Alan. People who knew Alan really well would have been able to have known that that wasn't Alan very quickly. But people who didn't know Alan well, or just barely knew Alan, if Mr. Scratch tried, he probably could have passed as Alan Wake, at least for a short period of time. Now, as you all remember at the end of the first game, Alan got trapped in the dark presence, the dark place. Now, as you know, Alan's stuck down there. Alice was probably at one point stuck down there. And the important thing to remember about the dark place is that Thomas Zane had been trapped down there for 30, 40 years. He hadn't even been able to find his way out. But if you had played through the end of the DLC, you saw that Alan had an idea that since he was in a place where writing could make manifest things, like he could write something and it could happen, he was in a place that was that powerful, he could try to write himself out. And at the end of the DLC, the second DLC, he put some paper into a typewriter, and he's like, I'm going to write a sequel to Departure, which was the manuscript that was the guideline for the very first game. And he types it out, the title of Return.
It wouldn't take much for my thoughts to stray again. It was too easy to get lost in the dark place. Before, I was ready to curl up and die, let myself slip away. But here I was, the yet unwritten future waiting to unfold before me. A sequel to Departure. My name is Alan Wake, and I'm a writer.
Fast forward, I think it was, 2 years later after the events of the first game, when the second game picks up, when Alan Wake's American Nightmare picks up, we see Barry Wheeler, Alan's friend, Alan's confidant, Alan's manager, asleep in his in a motel, and we see what he's been up to really quickly. We can see that they had the tour bus for the Old Gods of Asgard, that he's now their manager, that he's got them touring again, they've got a new single out, and Barry falls asleep late at night, and he's watching the Twilight Zone ripoff that's created for the Alan Wake universe, which was Night Springs.
Becomes hopelessly blurred, and nowhere as vividly as in Night Springs.
Now, if you remember from the very first game, Alan used to write Night Springs, or at least some of the episodes. Some of the episodes are all done by different types of people. He didn't write every episode. But Barry actually got Alan. That was his first gig. His first ever paid writing gig was an episode of Night Springs, and he later wrote others. So while Alan is trapped in the dark place, and Barry is sleeping away with the television on, and we can see actually from the outside of the motel that Barry is likely in Arizona. In fact, I think that somewhere in Arizona was actually shown during that sequence as well. If not, it was shown later. But you can see that. All of a sudden, it kind of zooms into the television, and we see that Alan is inside the TV in the episode. And it focuses on the battle between Alan, who's referred to by the narrator. I won't say for legal reasons what narrator that they were impersonating, but the Twilight Zone narrator. And his dark half, Mr. Who is like the evil, the other, the champion of dark. Now, Mr. Scratch casts Alan off into this, deeper into this dark place after coming across each other. And Alan we see him outside the cabin, in an unfamiliar territory with different clothes. And the first thing you ask yourself is, where is he and what is he doing there? Well, he's still trapped in the dark place. There's no way around that. He's still trapped in there. He's trying to find his way out still. He's been in there for quite a while. He's trying to find his way out, but he's still in there. The reality of that creation of the dark place shared some connection with reality. But he was still in the dark place. Now, why Arizona? There were two reasons, I think. Now, again, one of these is pure conjecture, but one of these is confirmed. Why Arizona? The first is, I think it was Arizona because Barry was in Arizona. And I think that what was going on was that Alan was more than just in an episode of Night Springs. Alan was in the episode of Night Springs that Barry was watching. Literally, if Barry was awake, he would literally have seen what was going on in the game. He would have literally seen Alan fighting Mr. Scratch if he had been awake. What also happened, and at least I think, and that was my conjecture. What was also important to remember is the clothes that Alan is wearing. His outfit has changed. He's not wearing what he's wearing in the first game. Now that's more than just a practical standpoint. Obviously, you're not going to want to wear a heavy, wool jacket with leather patches and a hoodie underneath it if you're in Arizona. It's hot. You're in the desert. It's hot. The clothes that they had him in were very practical. He's wearing almost like a light flannel checkered shirt with a shirt underneath it and jeans, again, and a belt buckle, all practical clothes. But the manuscript pages actually made a mention of this. One of the last manuscript pages specifically said where Alan's clothes came from.
The clothes I wear now I shaped from dreams and memories. It's an old outfit, originally from the 90s. The last time I wore it was when I was still writing and Alice and I took a vacation in the desert before our troubles began. The night before, we'd been at a party, and I had dressed to the nines. On that lazy day, I put on these old clothes, worn and comfortable. Alice made a joke about grunge. I felt a little embarrassed, but I stuck with them. We were very happy. I'm sheathed in good memories to remind myself of what is at stake.
Alan's clothes were the same clothes that he wore on a vacation with Alice. It was probably the last vacation that they went on when they were happy. It was probably even the last vacation that they went on before they went to Bright Falls. And he wore it as a joke to kind of make her laugh. And she's like, oh, they're digging the grunge look. So there was definitely, whatever it was that they had done together, that might have been recorded, like maybe there were vacation photos or vacation videos taken. Obviously, Alice probably would have taken these photos or videos. That all ended up in there. Like, you see, we also know for a fact that more than just Alan had created work while he was in the dark place, but Alice had also created work while she was free. She had gotten out of the dark place, and Alan had sacrificed himself to basically trap himself in there, getting her out. But she had gotten out, and by that point, she had kind of left. That long afterwards, she had left Alan for dead. I don't know if she thought about, well, he drowned or he had gotten himself killed, but she, like maybe buried him or something like that. We don't know. She doesn't exactly say how she thinks he died. Just that it's been 2 years, he's probably dead. And she was creating her own work called Sunrise. And it was footage of Alan that was basically taken from all this different footage that she had gotten together. She spliced it all together and all kind of taken on a life of his own. That also ended up in Night Springs, when Alan was in there. So, fast forward, that's all backstory. Alan's in Arizona. He's written a manuscript to get himself out. He's in the course of this finding manuscript pages, but more than that, he realizes two things. One, he has the capacity to alter that reality based upon what he's written and what he's written that he can find, and that there are people in there that may or may not be real. He's also got communication with Mr. Scratch while he's down there in twofold. One, particularly the televisions. Now, Mr. Scratch, unlike Alan, can actually phase between reality and the dark place. Now, we don't know if that's because of mystical powers he has, but he did demonstrate himself that he did have supernatural powers. He had the ability to create these stronger Taken that Alan had not seen before. So Mr. Scratch obviously did have darkness powers. But we also got to see that he could move in and out of reality, meaning that he could interact with these people. And it's quite possible that Alan had intentionally written the manuscript to refer to people that he did know, or people that he could have known, or people that were real. Because the people that he interacted with that were not just Taken, but the women that he interacts with over the course of the game, in particular, one of them, who knew Alice, were possibly real, were possibly based upon real characters. He could have actually been interfacing with this. So, again, all backstory, but let's just get back to what exactly it is. For those of you who don't quite understand what's happening in the game, let me explain to you what happens in the game. Alan meets a woman named Emma Sloan, who's a car mechanic, working on just a car in the motel, fixing it up. And she has found one of his manuscript pages. She gives it to him, and he realizes that it's a formula for changing that reality. As he goes into the process of altering that reality so as to further advance the possibility of him getting himself out, or at the very least facing Mr. Scratch, he's able to alter reality in such a way that does continue the story, but it doesn't quite help him out, at least in his current predicament. It just continues to advance his plot. And again, I'm going to refer to this game as like a plot, as an ongoing plot, because of two reasons. One, it is a plot. There is a plot to it. But two, Alan has written this whole manuscript, so it is a plot. He brings this information to Emma, who says that she had ran into Mr. Scratch before Alan had showed up, realized that they were different because they had different mannerisms, different actions. She used the term aura because Emma was spiritual, probably believed in crystals and stuff like that. And told him that she ran into him at the diner, and that she had gotten out of that when he started going crazy and hurting people. So she gave him the key to the diner, goes into the diner, finds the diner totally trashed. Obviously Mr. Scratch had done it. And he finds tools that were left behind that were marked the observatory. So he goes to her and he says that there's something going on with the observatory. She says he was checked into one of the rooms. Why don't you check the room? And in one of the rooms he finds a dead body. The dead body is wearing a jacket from the observatory. He was obviously killed by Mr. Scratch. And Alan goes into the observatory to investigate. Meanwhile, in the real world, there's a radio show going on where the old gods of Asgard are being interviewed about their new single. Barry is interviewing them, so Alan is happy that Barry is okay. Back in wherever Alan is, back in Night Springs, Alan goes to the observatory and finds his way into the observatory and runs into Dr. Rachel Maddow. Or is it Dr. Rachel Maddow? I don't know. No, it's he runs into Dr. Rachel Meadows, and she also, having come into, had run into Mr. Scratch, said that he had been there while she was researching something, and had once he found what she was researching, went into a complete fit of rage and ran out. Now, the reason why, she also mentioned that she was really worried about her assistant. She said that she was at a party that was being done, an art exhibit, which is why she was wearing a dress. And what had happened was that she was called for when they got an alarm about this anomalous activity. They didn't know what it was. So Alan basically tries to help her to basically prove that he is not Mr. Scratch and he wasn't Mr. Scratch. Mr. Scratch, by the way, in reality is having just a field day killing people. And so what happens is that Alan decides to help her out and prove that. So they get the observatory working to try to find what Mr. Scratch was looking for, and they get a readout sheet, but it's incomplete. Now, here's the thing. What's been going on in that reality was that there was a satellite with the information that they needed. Mr. Scratch had likely been to see Dr. Rachel Meadow and had probably realized that when they got the transmission, that what was in that satellite, what the satellite was transmitting, was Alan's way out. And he was furious about this, and he didn't want Alan to get it. So he was doing everything in his power to make sure that Alan doesn't do this. And they find out that the information, they also find out who the dead body was. It was her assistant, who was told to go get food for them. In all likelihood, what had happened was that Mr. Scratch knew that if anything was going on with the observatory, that this guy was going to be a good reason, a good thing to have dead. And just again to screw up Alan even further, or at the very least to throw Alan off the trail. And Alan finally goes to the drive-in theater to investigate, because that's where the manuscript page told him to go. The drive-in theater also had a woman that was there who Mr. Scratch had violated with the darkness power. And she was under his influence, not quite all going on up there. And Alan decides to help her by restoring the power and basically putting her back in light to kill the darkness that had taken over her abilities. Now, the thing about all this to remember is that she knew Alice. This girl knew Alice. And she was actually friends of hers. And one of the movies that they were going to be showing at the drive-in for the art exhibit was Alice's movie about Alan, the Sunrise documentary. They were also showing things like Hammer documentary and Cannibal the musical and stuff like that. So, yeah, very funny stuff. So Alan gets the power on and starts the process of trying to replicate what he had gotten in that first transmission. Unfortunately, because the page is incomplete, it throws Alan in a loop. It doesn't work. Mr. Scratch pulls him out of it and basically returns him back to the initial point of him entering Night Springs.
You've been up to something. Too bad it's not gonna do any good. I'm a better you than you ever will be, and I've got everything you've got's going to be mine. Your life, your wife. What are you gonna do about it? The sun's never coming up now. I can keep this up forever. Show yourself! Whatever you say, buddy!
The rush of darkness is unstoppable. Time itself twists and tears, sweeping the champion of light back with its dark currents.
And Alan has to do it all over again. However, his cohorts, the women, actually kind of sort of remember what was going on. So every time, when he loops, they remembered some of the stuff that he was going to do just to further help him. Almost like they kind of remembered what was going on. They didn't quite know what was going on. Is this like a science fiction thing or something crazy? But Alan knew that this was not something that was previously written. Alan knew that this was more camp comedy or like, especially when it comes down to the big guys. This wasn't like a Stephen King or David Lynch story. This was more like a drive-in theater type, American cinema, gore fest or something like, something different. It was something different. So after doing everything all over again, Alan gets a bit more of the page and tries it again in the drive-in. Again, it's not enough. Mr. Scratch throws him in a loop again.
You're trying to be cute, aren't you? What up to? It's a waste of time, buddy. You should just lie down and die. Let me take over. This is the only thing you've got coming to you. From here to eternity. No matter how many times you come back.
Time folds back on itself. Again, his senses scream as the very impossibility of what is happening assaults them. But the champion of light endures.
By this point, Emma, who's in the motel, has fairly certain idea about what's going on. She left everything for him, and in advance. And the cool thing was that it's able to speed it up. And at the very end, Alan is actually able to save her. Meanwhile, in the real world, Alice is doing press junkets for her new documentary, and Mr. Scratch is talking to Alan about the possibility that I could start going after Alice if you want. I'm thinking about it, thinking about maybe pretending that I'm you, pretending to be you for a while. I have my wedding ring, I have your wedding ring. I can do it. And so time is imperative because it seems like it's real time in the dark place. That every moment that Alan is trapped in there is another moment that's going on in reality where Mr. Scratch is getting closer and closer and closer to Alice. So time is of the essence. It's imperative that he finds his way out. So he gets the third part of the page. He saves Emma's life, actually. She had died in the previous 2 time loops. She was killed by the Taken. He saves Emma in the third version. He finally convinces her. He figures out a way, basically, what they were doing to kill her. They were killing the lights in her garage. So he fixes that, and she survives. He goes back to the observatory, is able to get the final bit of the information from the satellite, and goes back to the drive-in theater to basically finish off the story. Fixes the power, goes back into the projection room, and the last thing he had to do was load Alice's documentary into the projector and play it. And that's exactly what he does. And that's the light that's emitted from her documentary is what kills Mr. Scratch.
Oh, come on, buddy. Why don't you... What? What is this? No! No! You can't do this! All I did was take the things you always wanted and never had the balls to go for. It's my turn now. It's my life. It's my life.
And then at the very end, Alan watches the ending to Sunrise, and he sees himself standing with Alice. And we don't know, is this what's going on in reality at that point? Is this something that had happened in the past? Or is this what the future will bring?
Alan? Is it really you?
It's really me.
How? I love you.
I love you.
A woman, a man, 2 lovers, held apart for far too long, enveloped in the light of a glorious dawn. They both feel it. He's home at last. Are these actual events or merely a dream? a memory, or a glimpse of what is to come. One thing is certain. This scene takes place in another time and another place, far, far away from Night Springs.
At the very end, the credits start to roll, and we see in the very end, towards the end of the credits, that the episode is marked. Tonight's episode of Night Springs, Return, written by Alan Wake. So that whole episode, that whole game, was what Alan started to write at the end of the last DLC, at the end of the first game, basically. That is the Return story. It's the episode of Return. And it's Alan Wake's writing. At the very end of the credits pass, and Barry starts to wake up. He must have gotten knocked on the floor because he was sleeping in his bed in the motel, but he's on the floor now, the bed's empty. And Barry wakes up, he might have fallen out of bed when the episode ended. And while the static plays on the television, he thinks he hears Alan.
No? Al?
Could Alan have got himself out of the television? We don't know, but highly likely. So that is what happened. That's basically Alan Wake's American Nightmare for you. My guess is, with some of this stuff all lingering in development, my guess is that Alan was able to get himself out, but what he saw in the sunrise was probably something different. What he saw in the sunrise was probably a vision of the future, not the present, basically. And I like to think that's important because that kind of means that Alice had just as much of a doing to get Alan out as he did. So I thought that was really nice. It's a fantastic game. If you haven't played it, well, what are you doing watching this video? Go play the damn game. It's great. And it's really worth the money. Really looking forward to Alan Wake 2. If you're curious if there's going to be an Alan Wake 2, right after that little mention at the end of the credits, it does say that Alan Wake's journey through the night will continue, which is exactly what Remedy wrote for the ending credits of Max Payne. It was Max Payne's journey through the night will continue. Now it's Alan Wake's journey through the night will continue. So I want to thank you guys for watching. I want to thank you guys for listening. Take care, guys. Check out my site, GameAccess.net. This is Maniac, over and out.